Okay, before we get started, again, I was remiss in my administrative comments, and I needed to make a couple other points. I hope, if you haven't gotten some of these bookmarks, that you take a look and take them home. These are for when you read real books. I know a lot of people like the digital stuff, but for those of you, I always take a hard copy book. I'm a faithful steward of the local library wherever I happen to live. And the other thing is a pocket constitution. Please take those with you. You've got all the First Amendment voice stuff right on the back of that, and you can learn more about us. But the one thing I would like to ask of you today is, should you take a photo of yourself, of you with a speaker, getting a chance to talk to them, please share them with us. And the easiest way to do that is to just tweet it out and tag @FirstAmend on Twitter. But if you're not a denizen of Twitter, then you can just email Haley, our comms director. And it's a very easy email. It's comms@firstamendmentvoice.org. But please share those photos. We love crowdsourcing photos of the events that we put on, and we hope to be able to share those with others who weren't able to be here in person, and we'd appreciate that. So it is my pleasure to be able to introduce Larry Rosenberg, the chairman of First Amendment Voice. Larry is a partner at Jones Day in Washington, D.C. He has litigated First Amendment cases up to the Supreme Court, up to state-level Supreme Court, I'm sure districts and all the other levels. So he's just, and he's a good friend and a great moderator. So, ladies and gentlemen, Larry Rosenberg.
Thanks. Steve, if you could stay up here for a sec. And next? Okay, never mind. Just wanted to thank you, Steve, for the lovely introduction. All right. So we had a wonderful, wonderful speaker before us, and I really appreciate that. And we are going to try our best not to completely fall flat after that wonderful presentation. We're going to be doing a panel on veteran civic engagement. And as the general said, one of the greatest attributes we can have is love. And one of the ways to spread the love is through getting engaged and doing things in our communities. And this wonderful panel is going to tell us how to do some of those things. Now, I'm a lawyer, and so I'm used to telling people that anything you say can and will be used against you. But nothing that is said today can and will be used against anybody by First Amendment Voice or our audience. We want to have a wonderful, free, and full discussion. So I'd like to basically just tell you who the panel is, and rather than having me go all effusive about them, I'm going to have them introduce themselves as they speak. And I think what we're going to do is just go in order and have them tell you a little bit about themselves and their stories. We have Paul McCulloch, we have Maura Mo Gillen, we have Councilman David O., and we have Glenn Schatz. And all of them have varied, diverse backgrounds and experiences. And I think it's really going to help us today to understand how we all can become more engaged. So thank you, and we'll turn it over, Paul, to you.
Okay, thank you. So first, I want to thank Larry and Steve for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel with this cast of all-stars. It's really special to be here with all of you today. So I have a lot of different things that I'm involved with. I got a full-time job, 3 part-time jobs, 3 volunteer jobs, but I'm not here to tell you my resume. At the core of who I am, my through line, if you will, is the concept of servant leadership. And in all the different things that I'm involved with, all my different activities, I ask myself a fundamental question. Is this the highest and best use of my time? And the way that I judge that is, can I draw a solid line from this activity to being able to serve and love other people in some way? And if the answer to that is no, this is not the highest and best use of my time. If it's just, a manual labor activity like mowing the grass, like I can get somebody to help me with that, I would rather be out serving in the community in some way. So for me, I want to really get after the idea of taking care of other people. Because at the end of the day, it is not about how much money you have. It's not about how big your house is. It's not about how fast your car is. It's not about any of those things. There's a parable in the Bible, and it talks about 3 people that are given talents. And 2 of those people go out and they use those talents and they invest them. In the Bible, the talents are referring to money. And the other person goes and buries it in the backyard out of fear of making the master upset. And the master comes back and he says, oh, well, you 2 guys that did a really good job, I'm going to double what you had. You that buried your talent in the backyard, I'm going to take away that talent, and I'm actually going to punish you because you knew that seeing your return on investment is important to me. You didn't do anything with your talents. And so from a proverbial perspective, I believe that at the end of the day, when I die, I'm going to get asked 2 questions by the God of the universe. One is, did you or did you not accept the free gift of salvation that was given to you by my son? But more relevant to this audience, Paul, I gave you a whole lot of gifts, special, unique abilities and talents. What did you do with them? Did you love, serve, and care for other people, or did you bury those talents in the backyard? A new friend of mine recently shared with me a poem called The Dash. And it talks about this idea of there's a dash between the day that you were born and the day that you die. And what did you do with your dash? What did you do at the time that you were given? Because like the general said, none of us are immortal. None of us get to hang around forever. So what did you do with your dash? And for me, it comes down to what I call my life verse. And that's John 13:34. And the short version of that is love others as I have loved you. Now that's a very tall order when you put that in perspective, right? If you think about what Jesus Christ did, dying on the cross to save humanity, past, present, and future, from their sins, that is a very big ask of us. So it is not very frequent that you're in a life or death situation where you can literally give your life to save somebody else. But what can you do on a daily basis? The small things to love, serve, and care for other people. That is really a big question. And so for me, I have seen this play out. I host a radio show / podcast called Serving Our Nation. I've been doing that for about the last year and a half. And I've had well over 150 guests on my show at this point. And week after week, guest after guest, I hear re-emphasized 2 things that I already knew, but I get to share it with my listeners. And that is, when you serve other people, there are 2 blessings that come from that. One is the actual act of service, because there is joy in that. When you are serving other people and loving other people and caring for somebody else, there is joy in that because there's a smile on their face as big as the universe. But the second piece is, as a almost afterthought of that service, there is a blessing that comes, almost like an afterthought that comes. It may not be today. It might not be tomorrow. It might be a month from now. It might be a year from now. But I can tell you story after story in my own life, and I share it in my show. I talk about it from the perspective, you reap what you sow. Or from a non-biblical perspective, when you put good into the universe, good comes back to you. And so I've heard that from guest after guest, week after week. And I'm going to share just a couple quick stories about how that plays out in my own life and a couple of other people. So over 6 years ago, my uncle, who is not just my uncle, but a very close personal friend and my mentor for a very long time, and has also served as a sort of father figure for me, he was diagnosed with kidney problems, massive kidney problems. So I think it was like stage 4 at the time of renal failure. And the entire family was tested. His wife, his daughters, ex-wife, sisters, all the above were tested. I was the only one in the family, and I was a perfect match. And at the time, I was still working for the Army. And the Army, if you understand the acronym, Uncle Sam ain't released me yet. That's what U.S. Army stands for. The Army said to me in no uncertain terms, hey, so you are the property of the U.S. government, and you have to get permission from the Army Surgeon General to give a kidney. So it was a long, arduous process of jumping through hoops. And before I could go and do the surgery, I had to sign a document saying, hey, I fully acknowledge and realize bad things could happen to me during the surgery and after the surgery. And if that means I can't perform my duties, the Army has the right to kick me out. And then I had other people tell me, hey, if you do this, that means there's going to be certain limitations in your life. I don't care. I'm signing up. And so, one, there was such tremendous joy right after the surgery. Again, going back to my original statement, when you serve somebody, the person smiles from ear to ear. Their smile can light up a room. And it was so special for me because I saved a human life. Of all the things I've ever gotten to do, I saved a human life. Like, that means something. But then the second thing is, I've now had more than 6 additional years with my uncle. That surgery was May 2nd, 2016. 6 more years that I've still had with my uncle. And he was going through kidney dialysis at the time. And he was not looking good. And it was very evident, either give the man a kidney or watch the man die. So I gave the man a kidney. So serving really starts at home. There was a young man, and he had a disability. And he was not being included. He did not feel loved from his community because he had a disability. He had Down syndrome. And so his father continued to speak words of life into him and continued to give him encouragement and to help him find purpose and value and meaning in his life with the gifts that God gave him. And so he encouraged him to go and do an Ironman triathlon. And so he got a coach, and that coach helped him and inspired him. And when he wanted to give up at the end, his father came alongside him, as did the coach, and continued to speak words of life into him. Serving starts at home. That young man finished, and he was the first person with a disability to finish and be an Ironman triathlon completion. Okay? And the last thing I'll share with you, one of my hats, I have a great opportunity to serve as an adjunct professor at Drexel University. And the subject matter is not really relevant. What really matters to me, I've taught that course 4 times in a row now, 4 semesters. And every single semester, in the end of course feedback, I have students writing on there, and I have no knowledge of what they say, right? I don't know who says what, and it's just an anonymous survey. Every single semester, I have 2 or 3 students that write on there, single best professor I've ever had. And it's not because of the content of the class. It's mildly amusing at best. Okay? It's about I care for them. And from the very first time that we have class together, I say to them, how can I serve you? And I live that out through the entire course of the semester. And when things come up, I tell them, life happens. So when something comes up in your life, come to me, let me know, give me notice, and I will work with you. And throughout the entire course, I emphasize, I beat it into their heads. You have value. You have gifts. The general was talking about he's an introvert. And I did a quick little MBTI thing with people in my class. Half the class is introverts, half the class is extroverts. But I emphasize them over and over again. It doesn't matter your personality. It doesn't matter your background. All those things that general talked about, not relevant. What matters is that every single person has value, every single person has a voice, and every single person has talents. And when you find those things, that is how and when you can make a difference in the world, you can get involved, and you can be civically engaged. So going back to the 2 questions, to me, when I die and I give that response to the God of the universe, all I want to hear, all I'm ever concerned about is, well done, my good and faithful servant. So that is my prayer for myself, for my students, and for all of you. Thank you, and God bless you.
Paul, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I will note for the audience, if you want to donate a body part, Steve is out back with a hacksaw. You just pick the part and he slices it off. So, but seriously, that was really inspiring. I guess one question I would have is, if you had one piece of advice to say a veteran, how can you become more engaged from your perspective, whether it's faith-based involvement or other? What would your one piece of advice be?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I would tell them to really understand who you are and what your giftings are, because there are so many ways that you can get involved. My show talks about having people from all walks of life, military, faith, community, business leaders. And again, something as simple, maybe not as simple, but as fundamental as serving at home. So that would be my piece of advice to them, is just find out how God has wired you. There's all kinds of tests you can take. There's the MBTI, there's Clifton Strength Finders, the list goes on. And it helps you understand how you're wired and what your giftings are and what you would excel at. And then once you find those things out, there's so many organizations that align with all kinds of different giftings. So just figure out who you are, find an organization, or maybe a half dozen, and then get after it.
Great. Well, thank you. Mo, why don't we go on to your story for a little bit?
Thanks. First, let me just say I'm delighted to be here at the Constitution Center, and also, among some veterans in this community that I've worked with in the past, we are very, very blessed in the Delaware Valley to have so many veterans who are civically engaged, and I really just feel like I'm sitting here as one of them. My husband's in the audience, and he's also a veteran who's very civically engaged in our community. I want to tell my story focusing on some key words. My favorite word, one of my favorite words in the English language, is how. Things like, how do we get stuff done? But I'm going to pause for a minute and start with why. I like to tell the story that I wore a uniform long before I joined the military. I was a Girl Scout and a Red Cross instructor before I ever went to the military academy at West Point. And even while I was in the service, I was still serving my community in other ways. I earned the MOVSM, the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal, in the year of Desert Storm, because a number of others that I knew were deployed, and I was stuck in a staff job at Fort Monroe, and I wasn't going anywhere, but I could still serve my community that was left behind. And so I put in 240 hours that year serving through Red Cross and Girl Scouts and my church. But I don't think I'm unique. We know that veterans, kind of as a group, volunteer. Some of that is for a sense of purpose, because we're kind of called to mission. And some of that is also for a sense of belonging, a sense of community, finding our tribe. I remember vividly standing in the gravel at BIAP, Baghdad International Airport, redeploying home from my one deployment. And I was listening to a playlist on my iPod that my brother-in-law had given me, and Rodney Adkins came on, These Are My People. And I'm standing amidst thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and just kind of looking around, yep, these are my people. Fast forward a number of years later, after my service here in Philadelphia as the head of the ROTC at Drexel and some other jobs, and I actually went to vote in a polling place for the very first time. I have a record from New York State telling me that I voted 26 times absentee ballot. I didn't vote in every general election. There were a number of the primaries that I missed. But on a pretty consistent basis, I grabbed that cardstock form with the red printing and sent it off to the Albany County Courthouse to request my absentee ballot. So the first time I actually voted at a polling place and pushed the buttons was really exciting for me. And it was my neighbor Cindy who was working as the judge of elections, and she took my picture. Now, you're not supposed to take pictures in a polling place, but as the judge of elections, she absolutely understood. And it's not a great photo anyway, it's kind of fuzzy, but there was that moment that's vivid in my mind when I looked around at my neighbors who were serving as poll workers and realized that this was my new tribe. This community where I had settled was kind of my new people. So I'm very active in my community. I have served as a poll worker for a number of years, and I really appreciate the vet the vote, but watch out for that Hatch Act, because that'll get you in trouble with the lawyers. I am currently serving as assistant treasurer for the Haverford Civic Association. I also work on the website for Haverford Civic Association. For the Federation of Civics in Lower Merion, I am currently secretary. And if you want to get involved at kind of an introductory level with an organization, I always recommend secretary. I had served as secretary for the West Point Society of Philadelphia for a number of years, and then as treasurer. I also now am co-president of the Central Montgomery County Business and Professional Women, where we have a specific project outreach for women veterans. And that's sort of the short list. There are others. But back to that word, how. We've talked already about skills, and I do think that military people bring some skills to civic engagement that are really important. We're fairly well organized. We can run events. Many of us have been involved in change of command ceremonies and all kinds of other events. And so, we can do things for our communities that bring people together. My background happens to be in public affairs. So, the marketing side of things, I can do social media, and those are some of the skills that I bring to the fight. Using my skills is important. But one of the more important pieces is just showing up. When there are issues that are up for discussion. I tend to show up at our Board of Commissioners meetings in Lower Merion, and if there's an issue that's important to me, I show up at the committee level meetings, and I also show up at the commissions and board meetings. I was there at the Board of Commissioners meeting this past Wednesday night, and I spoke during what they call public privilege of the floor, and I call public responsibility of the floor. To me, government well run, especially at the local level, is a three-legged stool. We have our paid staff, who I'd like to view as public servants. We have our elected officials, and we have the public. And I think as a member of the public, I need to show up, and I need to call out what I don't think is right in an engaging and non-confrontational way. And I had spoken this particular evening about public comments, how they were being read into the official record. And on my way home, one of the commissioners called me and he disagreed with me. And we had a great little chat. But one of the things he said, and he said this before, is he appreciates my speaking up because I've done my research. And so I think that's part of showing up is, sort of number three. If using your skills, showing up. Number three would be learning about the issues. I am not a fan of Action News. Hank and I do not watch nightly network news. It makes me crazy. It is headlines. It is too dramatic. I want to read the story in the newspaper the next day, and I want to read all the way to paragraph 7, at least. If it's an issue that's interesting to me, I'm not going to stop at the lead or the bridge. I have to go at least to the 7th paragraph, and I encourage my kids to do that as well. It becomes a little comical. Our son Henry won't vote because he says he's not well read on the issues. I would love for Henry to actually read on the issues, but I understand his point. If you're going to speak up, you have to know what you're speaking up about. So that's kind of my pieces of how, a little bit of what, and why I'm engaged in civic activities within our community. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to those issues.
Thanks so much, Mo. Let me ask you this question. If there was a piece of advice you would give to women veterans about how to become engaged, what would you tell them?
I love my women veterans. I have a really great group of gals that I hang with periodically. We met as a therapy group at the Vet Center in Norristown, and we've kind of just stayed very close, and we show up at things. And one of the things that my girlfriend Kat does is she always asks for a veteran discount. And initially, I kind of balked at that. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel. I don't need a discount. But I realized that the reaction she was getting was, oh, you're a veteran too. And I think just that piece, hey, do you happen to have veteran discounts, gave an opening to let people know we're veterans too. So I do think that somehow finding a way to get it into the conversation is more important for women. Mathematically, if a woman is carrying an ID card, she's more likely to be a spouse. Women veteran numbers are just smaller. So we have to find ways to have those conversations. I don't know if you see my name tag here, but it says Maura Mo Gillen, U.S. Army retired. Just little ways to work it into the conversation. But if there are women veterans who are interested in getting involved, I do think it starts with showing up and learning the issues and kind of that entree into politics, but there are a lot of great programs available for women veterans. There's a gal at Chestnut Hill College who runs a program called Women Veterans Rock, and very aggressive about enlisting women veterans to run for office and giving them the background and the skills and some of the foundation that they need. So there are some terrific programs out there, and yeah, I think we need more representation. Were you the one speaking earlier about a judge who was, there was I got a chance to listen to an event on Wednesday where they were, Laurel House, which is a housing for domestic violence victims and families, was honoring my friend Cheryl Austin, who is a retired Navy captain who, after serving as a lawyer, ran for a judge in Montgomery County, and she just finished 10 years serving as a judge with the Common Pleas Court and was our vet court judge. Mm-hmm. There are incredible positions where women veterans are doing really important work as elected officials, and I absolutely would encourage that.
Well, that's a great segue with elected officials to Councilman. Oh, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself and tell us some of the wise things you have to say.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm the guy who got half a talent, not a whole talent. And that has driven a lot, I think, about how I look at life. What do you do with half a talent? What are you worth? How do you contribute? And I had poor habits. I was pretty much raised in one of our poor neighborhoods in Southwest Philadelphia. And I had lots of bad habits and lots of bad friends. And I often found myself in what I called the land of regret. Oh, I regret. I should have studied. I shouldn't have gone out. I shouldn't have been hanging around. I shouldn't have been doing a lot of things. But I just didn't have discipline. But I had hope. I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to do something. My father was a pastor, and I so much admired him for his authenticity, his commitment. I could not be that man. Went through so many things. But I did find that the best things in my life I did not earn. The best things I received I do not deserve. My wife, my children. If you really think about the best things in your life, there are things that you were gifted. So I wanted to be a lawyer, and it was my dream to be a smart, conscientious person who could bring justice with education, knowledge, and ability. And I did eventually graduate from law school, serve in the DA's office. I did a number of things, many of the type of civic service that we're talking about. But it was because I didn't know how could I fit in. If I could just serve here, do some menial thing, if I could fit in here, help out. I was looking for a way to serve. But the main thing I wanted to do was be an attorney. And I thought I could do good things as an attorney, not only as an attorney, but as someone with a law firm. And I set about that. And every now and then I would run into a problem and I would introspect. Oh, why are things bad? Maybe I did something I'm not aware of. Let me think. What have I done? Did I offend someone, hurt someone, do something? I'd study myself and I'd find the answer and I'd try to make amends and I'd get back to the business of building my law firm, making it successful to do great things. And one day I hit a ceiling and I was stuck and I could not overcome whatever the problem was. And I was thinking deeply about it and I was listening to the radio and they were talking about, in those days, riverboat gambling. Riverboat gambling back in 2001, 2002, was going to come and save Philadelphia. It was going to create all these jobs. It was going to be a miracle. And I said to myself, that's nonsense. someone should say so. Someone should talk about where do we get jobs from and how do we actually deliver excellent public education in poor neighborhoods. And I was aware of that. Not because I'm a bright guy. I started from the beginning. I'm not a bright guy. But I was very interested in all these things, and I had seen it. And then I thought, God has blessed me with so much that I did not deserve. I did not earn. Maybe what I should do is run for office. I'm going to lose, but I'll run for office. I'll run real hard, and I'll talk about issues like how do we create jobs? How do we improve our community? What could we do for the future? And the great thing is, since I don't know what I'm doing, never did it before, have no support, no backing, no financing, I'll just go out and get clobbered. And that'll be my testimony, my willingness to talk about issues intelligently, intermodal transportation, overseas, global economy, where manufacturing is really the creative arts economy, all that type of thing. I'll go talk about it. And if I do a really good job, the real candidates, the ones backed by the parties, I might interject these ideas into the campaign. And then, after I lose, and I'm all bloody, God will look down and say, good job. Go back to making money and building your law firm. What I had found is somewhere between the time I was a child watching Perry Mason and dreaming of being this lawyer who did good and helped people, I had started to build a golden calf to myself. The law firm David O. That's what I called it, the law firm David O. Building clients, building things, And I said, wow, I've really gone astray from what I really wanted to do. And so I did run for office, and it was a very interesting experience, a very good experience. Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. I've been through every one of those stages, and it's absolutely true. From just a blank stare to giggling, laughing, ridiculing, to smearing and attacking everything. And I didn't win. I ran, I lost, but I did surprisingly well. And then soon after that, I lost my contracts at my law firm. They came in with the truck, took all my files, all that stuff, and I was like really getting spanked. And it came to my mind, 4 years later, I'm going to run again. And 4 years later, I did run again. I had tremendous opposition. I won on election day by, I think, 6 votes. And the next day, they told me they didn't count any absentee ballots, so I lost by 122. And 4 years later, I ran again. And, I was pretty much on my way to losing. And I remember I told my wife, I said, we got to go to this thing. And I just told her, I said, listen, I lost. And, I had told her just before then, the final 2 weeks, I said, listen, we only have $5,000 left, the baby's money. And I said, I'm not asking you to spend the money. I'm just telling you, we put everything into this. The only thing we have left is $5,000 for the baby. My wife said, spend it. And I said, no, I want you to spend it. And it's not because of the money. It's because we want to be 100%. What we want to leave our baby with is giving it our all for what we think is a good thing. It's a better gift than $5,000. But we were broke, and I was going to get run out of town anyway. Everybody's running me out of town. I couldn't have shown my face anywhere. But a miracle happened. I was losing. There was no way I was going to win. Everybody had left my little I don't have celebratory parties. I just, we watch the returns. And, I'm not celebrating anything beforehand. But in the corner, people started getting excited. I think I was losing by 1,500 votes at the end of the night. No way I was going to win. And they got excited because the number went from 1,500 to 1,400 to 1,300. When we hit a flat 1,000, people cheered. And then we got to 500. And then it was 200. Then it was 100. And it was so exciting. I had a friend. He's a much older guy. He lost everything gambling. And he was getting really excited. And I was feeling bad, oh, my God, I'm going to bring back his gambling problem. But anyway, he said, this is so exciting. And to make a long story short, I did win, and I did stay the winner. Well, I just say winning, running, it was a miracle that I won. And it was a miracle that I won again 4 years later. And it was a miracle that I won in just the last time in 2019. I have the Democratic machine against me, the Republican machine against me, the progressive working family. I got everybody against me. And I'm not saying because I'm a great, smart guy, nothing like that. I'm just saying that sometimes there's something for you, but you got to try. You got to believe that what you're going to do is a good thing. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. We just try. And I think for veterans, you have served. However you served our nation, not our city or our county or one group of people over it. You've served our nation. And the ideals, there's no perfect nation, but the good ideals, all the people, you have something to bring to our government and to our democracy and to our republic, those ideals, and to the world. Democracy and freedom doesn't exist in a vacuum. And from my little corner here in Philadelphia, I have something to contribute. What I really think about is this, and maybe this will resonate with you as well. What is a great community? What is a wonderful city? Is it the buildings? Is it streets paved with gold? I think it's the people and how fulfilled they are and how honestly and justly they're treated. And if there's wonderful opportunities and equal opportunities and justice in public education and things like that, wouldn't we love to be in this city? And wouldn't we love each other? And this thing that we're talking about now, just the polarization and how we hate other people's opinions and hate their label, and how a label will describe everyone to the extent we just do away with them, protest them, disregard them. I think it's terrible. We are no longer in an era where we can talk about reason and reasonable. I'll leave with this. There are 1,600,000 people in this city, over 1 million voters. Next year, when people vote for mayor, only 300,000 people will vote, for and against whomever. It doesn't matter. 1.3 million people won't vote. Some of them can't vote. But most of the people who don't vote are in the center. They're the ones who will hear you and talk with you and be tolerant of you. The most enthusiastic people are at the ends. They're very clear. And that's fine. I'm not against being clear, being on this end or that end. I'm just saying, but what happened to the middle? If the most polarizing people are the only ones who get excited about the election, they're the only ones who put money into candidates, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is what you shall have. We are challenged to get people in the middle who are tolerant and who want to have common ground to come out. I think veterans, very much so, fill that gap, and I hope veterans will come out. And in addition to all the wonderful ways of volunteering, because everybody hates politics, put on that uniform of public service, sacrifice yourself with that miserable thing called politics, and get engaged. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That really is an amazing story, and I didn't realize you had gone through the complete travails of the political process. That really is amazing. Do you have any practical advice, if there are any veterans, either in our audience here or listening in, who say, yeah, I do want to get involved in politics. I'm not ready to run for office, but I'd like to do something. What would you tell them they could start out doing?
Get engaged at whatever level you can. As you said, we need people to be at the polls. Listen, if you're in Philadelphia, you get paid for it. You don't get paid a lot, but you'll get paid for it. But if you're working the polling places, if you're helping people vote, if you're just smelling the air and being in the environment, you'll learn something. If there's an issue that you're interested in, get involved in the issue. It doesn't matter. You know, you have your opinion. Nobody else's opinion matters. Just your opinion, what you think is right. You don't have to run for office, but I'm just going to say, if you have something to contribute, don't be deterred. There's a lot, I hate to say it this way, I'm just going to say it. There's a lot more stupid people holding office than you. So you might as well get out there. You'll be surprised who gets these positions because nobody tries. Like, try. Give it a shot. Look, you don't get it. Is that going to be a big deal? It isn't. It isn't a big deal. Offer something. And I would also say this. If you only do what you can do, where is the magic? Reach for something you can't even grasp, and you will get it. And it'll be a wonderful part of your life. The testimony. The testimony is to do in your life, in word and deed, that is beyond your ability to do. And if you're a faithful person, that's what the faithful life is. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. Glenn, maybe you can tell your story and inspire us as well.
Sure. It's hard to follow all of my fellow speakers, but I'll give it a shot. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was called to service relatively early in my life. My mother was an immigrant. My grandfather on my father's side was an immigrant. I didn't know until recently. I always thought he was an orphan, but my grandfather served in World War I. My father served in World War II. And even though they both only served for a couple of years, not really by choice, the stories that I was told growing up by my father was around what that service meant to him. I never met my grandfather, but what that service meant to my grandfather. In fact, the very few stories I had about my grandfather were either him being illiterate but able to work through the Great Depression, or his service during World War I. And one of my father's best friends growing up was a West Point grad who, even though they disagreed on just about everything politically, they were best friends, and I learned a lot about what service meant to him. And so, you know, no one ever told me, they didn't call it service, they just told stories. It was just stories that I heard when I was a kid. And so, you know, growing up in a, say, solidly lower middle class household, but I was comfortable, had I think a great childhood. You know, being the child of an immigrant and then of someone who came to this country with nothing, felt like you know, America and the American idea gave me a great life to start. And so then as I started exploring what I wanted to do, when I was in high school, I was not paying attention in class. I didn't always make good decisions. But you know, and one of the announcements was, hey, you know, our congressperson is accepting applications to be a congressional page. And I was like, oh, it's a good way to get out of Tucson, Arizona, where I was from, for a little bit. So I applied, was selected as the alternate, so didn't go for a semester. And then I think one day in the middle of December, my junior year of high school, got called to the principal's office, luckily for not something bad that I did, and said, hey, you know, Congressman Colby's on the phone. And I was like, for what? and I remembered, like, last year I applied to this thing, and he said, hey, my page decided she didn't want to spend the whole year there. Can you go to DC in 2 weeks? And I said, sure. And so I went home, told my parents, I just said, I'm going to DC in 2 weeks. They were luckily very supportive. We had to go buy a suit, which I didn't have. And I spent my second semester junior year of high school, I kind of gave up baseball and basketball, which I was playing, which was a big deal, to go live in DC and kind of figure out what people did on Capitol Hill. And you know, it really changed my idea of what types of service can be. So not just military, not just the volunteers that I you know, knew growing up doing different things, but public service in the elected sense. And this was in the late 90s. And so politics were still, you know, I mean, politics has always been rough, but they were getting rougher. But even then, I saw a lot of the people that ran, that were in office for the right reasons. Got to spend every day on the House floor talking to these elected officials and just learning about what they cared about, why they were in it. And back then, still the vast majority of them were in it or got into it for the right reasons. Not all of them were still in it for the right reasons, but just to hear their stories was really impactful for me. And when I was looking at what I wanted to do for college, I think based on the stories I was told as a child, I always wanted to serve in the military somehow, and so I ended up applying to the Naval Academy, went to the Naval Academy, and then didn't really know what I was getting into. I hated it for my first couple of years, didn't understand what the military was about, but don't like quitting things, so I pushed through, ended up becoming a submarine officer, spent the beginning of my military career as a submarine officer, and then toward the end, my last job in the Navy was going back to the Naval Academy to teach the Introduction to American Government and Constitutional Development, the required class for all plebes, all freshmen. So had to figure out a way to teach that class, which everyone takes, but in a way that was meaningful to me. So I spent a lot of time during that class within what I was allowed to do with the customization of the class, focusing on civil rights, civil liberties. Those two sections were the most meaningful to me. And trying to come up with lots of stories and activities that made it meaningful to the midshipmen, because it's one thing just to teach about, what the Bill of Rights is and what, the Constitution says, but really I think trying to make it meaningful to the midshipmen was important to me. And then I got out of active duty then. I'm still a reservist, but left active duty to be an entrepreneur. Did that for a couple years and just kind of kept feeling a pullback. So I went to work for the government, for the Department of Energy, for a couple of years. And I've always had this push-pull between doing something entrepreneurial. I'm just naturally entrepreneurial, and then also doing something which is more service-focused. And being in public service is also very entrepreneurial. It's just a different bent. And so, so I went back from the government back into the private sector to another startup. But after the 2016 election, I was feeling like this pull back to do something more service-oriented. However, I was, one of the first few employees at this company. We had grown by that point to about 50 people, so it was really hard for me to leave. I felt like I owed them something as well. But so, trying to figure out what could I do on the side. Could I run for city council? Could I run for school board? But all that takes a lot of time. And so a fellow Naval Academy grad who I knew through some friends started this organization called Veterans for Responsible Leadership. He started it in the wake of the Michael Flynn scandal. And the initial charge of that organization was to try to elect, it was a nonpartisan organization, try to elect people from both sides of the aisle who shared the ideals that we did as veterans. Not necessarily veterans, but people who shared those ideals. And so I joined that organization quickly, decided to take a more active role there, became the vice president with Dan. It was an interesting organization. It was started as a 527, which is a super PAC for those of you who are aware of it. So even though we were nonpartisan, it's very political, right? You're in the nitty-gritty, dirty weeds of politics. And so as we recruited people to join the organization, going into 2018, 2020, we tried our best to stay nonpartisan, but also ended up getting grouped into very partisan-leaning groups. And over time, people would come in and out of the organization who we think shared our values, but didn't also like the messiness of politics. And so going into 2020, as we were looking to the future, we wanted to see what the organization could do that not only was nonpartisan, but that could retain some of the people who wanted to be involved in politically oriented things, but not get involved with elections, in partisan elections. And so we spun off a group called We the Veterans. We the Veterans is a 501c19, which is a veteran service organization, really with two main things in mind. One is to combat veteran extremism through education outreach, working with other organizations that combat extremism of all kinds, with especially a focus on veteran extremism. And the other was to support democracy. And the most tangible way that we've been able to see that so far is through the Vet the Vote campaign. People really, when they sign up for something, or when they sign. So we reach about 60,000 people through our organization. We have one paid staff member. Everyone else is a volunteer. What we discovered with our last organization is people want something to do, and if they give you their email, they want to be put into work that's meaningful, and we've tried lots of different ways to do that. We started doing local chapters, we started doing other volunteer initiatives, but that all gets very complicated, especially when it's a group of volunteers. But it was really easy to say, the thing you can do is put your name on this form, sign up to be a poll worker, and we'll call you when we need you. And we found that approach, we've gotten a lot more people engaged, we've gotten a lot more people on our list, and we're hoping that we can keep contributing people to the Vet the Vote campaign, and then as we grow, as people feel more ownership of that initiative, hopefully expand to doing other democratization and democracy-facing activities. And again, this is all as volunteers, so we're all doing this on the side. So it's a very sort of different level of investment, but not everyone is able to give up, to change their careers or give up their family life or whatever it is. And so we'll take what we can get. And if it's 1 day a year, all day long, that's still a heavy commitment. But it's enough to start. And then, as all of our other speakers have mentioned, and as our keynote speaker mentioned, the joy that you feel serving others tends to be enough reward for anyone, and more rewarding than most other things people are doing either professionally, or basically everything other than family and maybe in religion in their cases. And so we're hoping that by tasting that experience of service and what it feels like, that can imbue into them some of the joy and the principles of service for other efforts that they might choose.
Thanks very much. Glenn, let me ask you this question. If somebody out here or in our audience has been motivated to get involved in the Vet the Vote campaign, what can they do? Like, is there a website they can go to? How do they get involved?
Yeah, so they can go to, I'm not going to get the URL right, so just Google Vet the Vote or Google We the Veterans, and then you'll get to the website. You follow us on Twitter for We the Veterans. We routinely will post stuff on Instagram and Twitter about Vet the Vote. And sign up. It's one form. Once you're on our list, we know where, like I said, we know where to find you, and you'll get information about that. And we don't spam inbox. We're not like a political organization where you're gonna get like 3 emails a day asking for money. We don't really do that. We just tell you, hey, here's how you sign up in your jurisdiction. Here's where they need poll workers. If you happen to have language skills, Spanish, Portuguese, depending on where you are, we do maintain a record of that. So making sure that we can get people that have special skills, language, IT, computers. As many of you know, there's a lot of electronics involved in a lot of voting these days. So different things where you can help people, basically help people vote, help people perform the duty that they want to do and may not always be equipped to do, but they're out there because they want to perform their civic duty. So we would like to make sure people can do that.
One thing that I did not serve in the military, but I did serve in the United States Department of Justice for a number of years. And one of the things I've heard a few of you talk about is serving in the government, whether it's local government, national government. And Glenn, you had served at the Department of Energy, which is a wonderful institution. I've sued the Department of Energy several times in private practice, but it is a great institution. And just get your thoughts on having veterans think about serving in government after their military service is concluded.
I think serving in government, especially as a civil servant, it's a very rewarding position. I think a lot of people, they think of government as this like giant bureaucracy of where their tax dollars go. But in most agencies that I was exposed to, I worked a lot of intergovernmental agency work when I was there. The people that sign up to be civil servants, in most cases, could make much more money in the private sector, have much more job flexibility. But they're doing it because they feel like they're contributing to making the country better. And in a lot of cases, the foremost experts in whatever the field that they're in at the various agencies are at those agencies. Again, because they care about the work, not necessarily getting rich off of it. And so for veterans who have left the military service, if they want that same feeling, it's a little bit different. So I work, I'm new in a new field now. I work in the healthcare sector, and that sector has some of the same sort of mission, like day-to-day, like mission feeling as it did when in the military. So federal service, unless you're in certain departments, doesn't necessarily always feel like that, but you do feel like you're contributing because of the work that you're doing. You can see it, on Main Street. You can see it if you're at DOE. You can see it in the utilities that go up. You can see it when solar panels go up, or depending on if you're in Department of Transportation, you can see it when new funding goes to rail lines, or when new highways get completed or fixed. So I think that if you like seeing, if you like feeling like you're doing something for more than yourself and you don't have the appetite to take on electoral politics, it's a good option.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that,
Yeah,
Larry?
please.
I had the privilege of working the decennial census in 2020, which got stopped short for a little bit, and then we got back in action. I worked in my community, and then I was assigned to neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and the opportunity to engage with local citizens on this really important effort, I found really fascinating and incredibly fulfilling. So I worked for the Census Bureau for a little bit for the decennial, and I came back to the Census Bureau a little while later working on the American Housing Survey. Census Bureau has a number of surveys that they do. Housing is every other year, American Community Survey, but just being in the communities was just a really engaging opportunity for me. And those surveys have start times and peaks, and then they finish up. And so if someone were interested in serving in government for a time period, the Census Bureau has that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think, I've known other people who've worked on the census who've found it a really rewarding experience. I can tell you this, that as a lawyer, if you sort of run into the thing that the councilman said, where you feel like maybe you're not contributing in the best way you can, but working for the government, whether it's the federal government at the Department of Justice, or state government in attorney general's offices, or city government, it's in the DA's office, it's a wonderful experience. I will tell you, there's nothing quite like the experience of going into court and going in as a representative of a government agency. It's a great feeling, and you get a respect you definitely don't get when you're in private practice. So that is a great point. Several of you have mentioned sort of an overlap between service and faith. And I wanted to just ask any of the panelists who want to address that, how that has manifested itself for you, and how you think it can help veterans in particular who are interested in becoming engaged, that overlap of being in the military, but also being a person of faith, and how that really motivates you.
Is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
So much like the general, I felt the call at a very young age, but I didn't really know it. So I was 8 years old, and I lived 2 doors down from the church, which happened to be the same school that I went to. And so I spent a lot of time with the Catholic priest. And so for quite a while, I was thinking to myself, I'm going to grow up to be a priest. And so senior year of high school, I had 3 brochures in front of me: West Point, the seminary, and the school that I went to. And so the decision process became pretty simple. I found out after a little bit of research that priests are not allowed to get married. I was like, oh, no, I need to get married. I want to have kids. Nope, game changer. But ministry was still mad. I was like, God will work it out. There will be a way for me to get into ministry at some point in the future. I'll just trust. And West Point, I said, again, I really want to have a relationship with a girl, and I just felt in my heart that was going to happen when I got to college.
Careful, Paul.
So I got to college, and I met the girl of my dreams, so that was great. And so I went to the school where I was able to live out both aspirations, right? So I went and got my degree in management information systems and met the girl of my dreams, and at the same time while I was there, I was able to pursue ROTC. So all throughout my college career and throughout my entire military career, I was very deeply engaged with my faith. Much like what the general said, every single location that I went to, I made best friends with the chaplain. And I was very, very much engaged with what was going on in the faith community, either at the chapel, if I was stationed at a base where had an active chapel community, or at the local church. And at one point, in the beginning of my career, when I was first starting to figure things out, I went up to a lieutenant colonel who was the base chaplain, and I said, "Sir, how do I grow up to be a guy like you?" And he grew up to be the chief of chaplains one day, but his remarks to me was, "Well, right now, you can't grow up to be a Catholic chaplain because you're married, and so, nope, that's out." And then he said, "And even if you change over to the dark side," which he was referring to Protestantism, "even if you change over to the dark side, well, there's this whole approval process and many, many steps that you have to go through. And right now you're a brand new second lieutenant. I would recommend you just learning about the Army and, being a good officer and cutting your teeth. And, again, God will work things out." Okay. Towards the end of my career, I landed in New Jersey, and there was a church there called Kingsway, and I was invited to participate in this program called Leader Step. And it rekindled everything that I had ever felt about faith and ministry and da-da-da. And I went up to the pastor, was like, "I need more. This program is over, but I need more." And he said, "Well, the next logical step is start taking classes for ministry." Okay. He said, "Do that. I'll help you with it. I'll mentor you. I'll shepherd you. And if you like it, then we'll take next steps." So it was a 3-year process for me. And, there's a lot that goes into it. But for me, it's always been faith and country. Those two things are interwoven. And so many of the organizations that I'm in, the things that I do, again, those two things are interwoven. So to me, they're inseparable, right? And even the pin that I have on here, if you look at it closely, it's a cross and a flag, just symbolizing the idea that they're interwoven. So for me, it's always about God and country. And eventually, God did work it out. When I retired from the military, I got my ministry credentials, and I was able to do a whole lot more. But it's all about faith. And God is never, ever, ever late. He's always on time. His timing may not align with what you think. And when you say to God, "Hey, I have this plan," he laughs. That's funny. You think you have a plan. Trust in my plan. So that's my story.
And so people who are interested in that overlap, who are veterans, for example, who are interested in doing things that combine their service with faith can join organizations like the ones you're involved with and others to become more involved in that.
Absolutely. In any chapel, in any church, regardless of you are a veteran or still serving, there are ways that you can get after it. There's the Knights of Columbus. It's just one off the top of my head. Within my chapter of AUSA, I'm the chapter president. So I get to incorporate faith in a whole lot of things that we're doing in our chapter. And there's a whole lot of other VSOs, veteran service organizations, that incorporate God and country. So again, going back to my previous point, find out what your giftings are, what you're wired to do. And there's so many different organizations where you can go and get after it, and so many different things that incorporate God and country.
Anybody else on the panel want to take that?
Yeah, I just want to take it in a slightly different angle.
Sure.
So I'm not a religious person. My father was a secular Jew. My mother is a devout Buddhist, and I married into a giant Catholic family who are very Catholic. But I spend a lot of my time at my last job and this job working with faith-based communities. A lot of what we did at my last company and what I do now is trying to do more traditional community organizing, trying to reach underserved communities, and the best way to typically do that is through communities of faith. And what I find is that the call to service and showing that you're willing to be a servant leader, which is important in pretty much every religion that I'm aware of, is enough to sort of, I mean, most religions are very welcoming anyway, but having that extra ability to speak to your own call to service, your own desire to be a servant leader for whatever you do, is a way to work amongst communities of faith, even if you don't share either that background or even the religion at all. And so, as veterans who may not come from faith-based backgrounds, I wouldn't let that dissuade you from being involved in service-oriented things that do touch religious organizations, because I think that the same ethics that guide most of us also guide all the major religions that I'm aware of.
Steve, how are we doing on time?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
I can tell a story.
All right. You want to tell a story? Tell a story.
Yeah, I'm going to tell a story. It's not actually an original story. And I get it wrong, but I'll kind of like fill it in like if I get it wrong, right? A 1,000,000-man army was marching against Israel, and the king was beside himself, and all of Israel with him. This 1,000,000-man army was going to destroy Israel. And so, not knowing what to do, someone said to the king, why don't we go up to our enemy up north and make a deal with them? And together, we will face this 1,000,000-man army. So the king said, oh, that's a good idea. So they sent someone over, and he came back and said, good fortune. I went up, and they said, yes, let us together face this threat that we mutually share. And the king was so happy, and all of Israel rejoiced, because now they're going to face this 1,000,000-man army. And that night, God came to the king in a dream and said, I was going to give you the victory, but you took this victory from me. You cut a deal with my enemy, and therefore your children shall not inherit the throne. Every time I face something that is beyond my ability to face, I think about that story. Don't cut a deal with the devil. Now, having said that, you would think I'm not a politician. Look, it's all about compromise, reality cutting. Well, maybe, maybe not, right? So I think about that because if you are a person of faith, and not everybody is, and I'm trying to make everybody, but you have something that you've got to reference in your faith. And where does that come from? My faith is not something I've created. It comes from the Bible that I have, the stories that are there. But what tells me is when you are going to face something, you could lose, you could be defeated, but face it. Face it without compromise. People say your job's very hard. I said, well, in a way, it's not hard. It's like Moses. Moses didn't part the Red Sea. God did. Moses had to stand up there and do something, or God wasn't going to part the Red Sea. I'm not going to fix the schools. I'm not going to fix gun violence. I'm not going to fix drug addiction. I'm going to try, but I can't try a little bit. I have to bleed. I have to give it my all. I have to be crushed. And then, when I've failed, maybe God will come in and do his magic. But not if I don't give it my all. And that gives me an ability to continue and continue and to continue with persistence. People would say beating a dead horse. But I don't look at it that way.
Thanks.
Comment on that real quick?
Sure.
I had a pastor tell me a long time ago, to Councilman O's point, you have to work like it depends on you and pray like it depends on God. And I was watching a movie recently, and it talked about a person that was really struggling against adversity. And the premise of the story was they had a farm and all like that, and the person was going out and planning and planning and planning, and the other guy, he said, oh, well, you know what? We're not expecting any rain for a long time. It's been a drought for such a long time. Why are you going out and planting? We're not expecting, there's drought after drought. It's what's in the forecast. I'm preparing for rain because I serve a big God. And so when you, again, work like it depends on you and pray like it depends on God, like Councilman O was saying, God takes care of the rest.
Mo, did you have any further thoughts either on that or on the idea of working 100+% to get what you need to get done?
I actually was thinking Councilman O is going in a different direction because there's a phrase in my mind that it's a good story, but I won't tell it just now. The motto, though, is I can't do everything, but I can do that. And I think that's important for veterans who may be considering an opportunity to serve. What can I do? I think service is service. In our church, Hank and I are both ministers. He's a lector, and I'm what they call an extraordinary minister of Holy Eucharist. And I served in that role in the St. Michael Chapel in Baghdad, which was a chapel that was staffed by the Air Force Chaplaincy and the State Department. And it mattered to show up on Sunday in, dusty boots and be able to serve the community there. It was really very special to be able to serve in that faith community. I also wanted to make sure that folks are aware on the serving as a poll worker it does vary by county. I actually, the first time I served was not in my own precinct, and that was a very interesting experience. And then got kind of landed at my precinct where I would normally vote. And the judge of elections is actually a former State Department Foreign Service officer. So he and I have these great conversations. And when I first got there, they kind of did the math and they realized, okay, so I'm one of the only Republicans in the room, so they made me the minority inspector of elections. And that's a really important counterpart position in Montgomery County. And when you actually, I ultimately did run for elected, that it is an elected position. I was in it as a volunteer initially, but then ultimately was elected into it. Montgomery County is very, clear about, oh no, minorities just means you got fewer votes. Okay, yes, it means I'm a Republican in a very Democratic county. But it is a wonderful balance of power in that polling place. And the checks and balances are clear, and the opportunity to serve my local community is just so rewarding. So yeah, vet the vote, man. I happen to be, as I put in my application to serve or to run, I happen to be working for the Census Department American Housing Survey, and as a supervisor, and so I was onboarding a bunch of new people, and I kept reading that Hatch Act flyer that you're supposed to give out, and at one point I went, oh, you're not allowed as a federal employee to run in a partisan election. And I went, oops. So I called the attorney, and oh my goodness, they hemmed and hawed about that for weeks before they finally got back to me and said, yeah, you have to choose. You can't work for the census and serve as the minority inspector of election in your precinct. And I said, voting's just too close to my heart. And I left the Census Bureau.
All right, well, we're almost out of time. Why don't we take some questions from the audience, and we have our microphone bearers here. Does anybody have any questions? Questions? Comments? Insults?
Can I throw out two
Yeah,
more?
sure.
We've talked a little bit about veteran service organizations. The VA regionally will have what they call community veteran engagement boards, and the one here in the Delaware Valley Veterans Consortium, is terrific. It's 130 different VSOs that all come together to provide services. So, if there's someone out there who would like to get involved in a veteran serving organization, you can go to one of those CVABs and see who's out there and doing good work in the community. The other thing is, the internet is magical, and you can find all kinds of things that are going on. Find your civic association and get involved very, very locally. Go to phlcouncil.com and Tuesday mornings, those meetings are broadcast, and you can sign up to speak your piece if you're here in Philadelphia. Just lend your voice.
Yeah.
And if I could do a quick shameless plug, if you're a veteran, service member, or a family member thereof, part of the Army family, the Greater Philadelphia chapter of AUSA would love to have you as a member. So we do 4 major events per year and 4 supplementary events per year. What I mean by that is there's another organization that's doing an event, and we help run that and we participate in that, but it's not our show. We just kind of come alongside and help. And then there's a whole lot of other pop-up events during the year run by other nonprofits and VSOs where we participate and we sponsor and we want to participate, but we're not a headline or anything at all like that. So I would love to have you as part of our AUSA chapter. It's a great organization, and we have a golf outing on the 13th of October. So our whole point with that is to raise money so we can help more veterans, service members, and their families. In the last 2 years that I've been chapter president, we have raised over $5,000 just among our board to help. There was one, she was a single mom, and she had 3 kids. And without our help, she would have not had any kind of Christmas at all for her family. And so just within our board, we took up a very large collection and got her entire Amazon wish list. And there was another family, who was a service member, and he had significant physical disability. He had stroke and just a whole lot of different things. And so because of that, he wasn't getting paid, and his significant other, she wasn't working, she had legal blindness and just a whole host of other things. So again, we took up a collection, worked with a whole bunch of other nonprofits, and provided them physical relief, financial relief, and a whole lot of other things. So there's a whole lot of other organizations, to Mo's point, including AUSA.
Thanks. And I would just make a final point that even if you're not a veteran, but are interested in becoming engaged in civic activities, there are all kinds of organizations, many of the same organizations that were talked about here, and other organizations that you can become involved in, whether it's political organizations, service organizations. The point is be engaged. As we say at First Amendment Voice, citizenship is not a spectator sport. Get involved. Just find what you like, what your gifts are, as the panel explained, and just get involved. And it will be extremely rewarding to you. The more you get involved, the more you serve in any capacity, the better. We've got some question back there.
Thank you, everyone on the panel, for a fascinating discussion about civic engagement. My name is Joe Cohn. I am with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE. We're very proud to be sponsoring today's event. And I think a lot of what's on Americans' minds is about the polarization that we're experiencing. We had a question about that to the last speaker. And I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on how veteran civic engagement can help take the national temperature down. And do you think it can? And if so, how does it play a role in doing that?
Well, I'll give the first shot at that. I think so. I think what's happened is that we went through a very unsettling time with COVID, the George Floyd riots, reactions, things like that. Okay, that's happened, but it also happened at a time where there's an explosion, that's my word, I'm an old guy, of social media. And so people now finding that if you make a statement, like you just make a statement, you read something in a reputable magazine or a professional, journal, and you make a comment, and all of a sudden you got like 300 people attacking you. You didn't read this report. You should have checked this. Why are you reading this magazine? And people are shocked. And then to hear about people getting fired, it has had a tremendous chilling effect. And so this side will come out with a very clear, passionate, absolutely, we are absolutely correct when we say this. They are 1,000% wrong. In fact, they're more than wrong. And they'll do the same thing. And a lot of people kind of watch that and don't want to get involved in that. It's like crazy, right? And so, unfortunately, we've had a chilling effect on just the freedom of expression, ideas, the idea that I don't really know. I'm just making a comment. I'd love to hear some feedback. I'm not, by posting this article, say I agree with it. I'm just saying, like, this is interesting. Is there any comment? And I think that will happen, this chilling effect, this polarization, until people start getting comfortable with the idea of commenting, and when someone makes a ridiculously personal, horrible attack, just saying, hey, that's uncalled for. Just until we get some normalization of regular folk back into the conversation through this new thing of ours, social media. I've got Facebook. I've got two. I got Twitter. I got Instagram. I have yet to do TikTok. It's just a foreign world, right? In other words, just the different many ways, and these people are on TikTok, these people are on Instagram, this is what you do on Facebook, don't do that on Twitter, type of thing. It's very complicated for a lot of folks. We don't really want to do it, but for young people, this is how it is. This is not like something they got to learn. And so I'm being left behind. The speed of communication, the method of communication, the communication technology, unless I become engaged with those technology tools, and I want to talk with people, and in my position, I must. So I do think as veterans, some of our older veterans from the Vietnam War, let's say, Korean War, they're not, some of them are and some of them aren't. But almost every one of our younger veterans is fully engaged in this. And now we have this separation. The common thing is we're veterans, but we have a very different pool of information and communications. And I hope that as everyone kind of shakes off the shock of what's happened and just starts engaging again with your constitutional right to express yourself. And if I dare say, what when I was a little boy is called rugged individualism, just the idea that you could be you, and that's all you really need. And I think veterans, from their standing and their service and their platform, can be a very leveling influence in our nation.
Yeah, there's a gravitas there, and I would just say two things real quick and then turn it over to the panelists. One is, we are planning an interpretive dance workshop for those who want to use TikTok. And secondly, that's kind of what First Amendment Voice is about. One of our missions is to try to encourage civil discourse about societal issues and rational approaches to things. And we have a lot of veterans in our community, and I think they bring that gravitas, that accomplishment in some way, that neutrality in some way that helps foster those discussions.
I'm just going to follow on the gravitas piece, because I think some of the skills and experience that veterans bring to a conversation are representation and also advocacy. Social media is tough because you get headlines. You don't get 7 paragraphs. And even if you're presenting in person at a commissioner's meeting, you get 3 minutes to speak your piece. But I do think that you think back on our military experience and the idea of standing with poise and using your voice to say in an articulate manner what you need to say, especially if you're advocating, I'm thinking of a sergeant who's trying to, get some, maybe a day off for one of his guys. There's an advocacy piece that we learn in the military, speaking to authority, and asking for things that we think are justified. I also think that representation piece is important, that, to be able to say, I live in this community too. My views are a little different from yours, but can we speak with regard for one another? And I think that's a veteran piece of that, is to be representatives.
One of the things that I really love about veterans and being a veteran, there's all kinds of research that shows veterans are one of the few professions that are trusted and beloved. There's a whole lot of other professions that are either not trusted or are declining on the trust level in terms of propensity of trust.
Like lawyers. Go ahead.
I didn't want to say it, but okay.
Lawyers and politicians.
So, 1, veterans are trusted. 2, again, there's all kinds of research that shows when you hire a veteran or you work with a veteran, there's a certain standard that comes with that because of the way that we're trained. And 3, there's also a perception and maybe even an understanding that veterans are leaders because of the way that we're trained. And so I read an article just this morning. There was a devotional, really, that came to my email, and it talks about you can't control what other people say to you. I mean, going to the question of, polarization and divisiveness. You can't control somebody else's reaction or what they say to you. You can control your own comments and reaction. And so are you going to be a very hard wall such that when somebody says something to you that may not be very nice, their comments are going to bounce off very hard and come back at them very hard? So just, escalation, bouncing back and forth? Or are you going to be a soft, maybe a mattress even, where you just absorb those comments, let it roll off your back, and respond to that person with love? Listen, I'm sorry if I offended you. I don't know what I said or what I did that ruffled your feathers, but I love you, I'm praying for you, and I just want to come alongside and work with you. And can we find a way to work together to achieve some common goals?
Glenn.
I'm not as optimistic. If I thought the answer was no, I wouldn't be here. So I think that it's a strong maybe. We identified the veterans extremism issue as something that we wanted to focus on in 2018. And despite what we tried to do and the alarm we tried to raise amongst our community, still a disproportionate number of the insurrectionists on January 6th were veterans. So I think we have a lot of work to do in our own community. I do think that one of the things that I really appreciate about being a veteran is that I was forced to be amongst people that I may disagree with politically, that come from different backgrounds, that I would consider friends that I have put my life on the line for, and they put their life on the line for me, and that bond is real. And so there's a door, if we choose to take it, to have that more civil dialogue with people that we disagree with, because we have that shared background. But a smaller and smaller percentage of our population has served. And so can we, with that 1% or so that does have a service background, can we be a strong enough voice? And I think the only way we can do that is if we get our house in order first. So I'm not saying we don't do it in parallel and try to have veterans speak up. I mean, that's why I'm here. But we have a lot of our own issues to work out around disinformation within our veterans community, around social media within the veterans community, as well also the veteran spouses. These are very insular world sometimes, especially in certain communities like special forces or other communities that tend to be more isolated from the rest of the society or the rest of the military. So there's this sort of two fronts in this fight. One is the broader discourse, which is very important, which I think veterans should be a part of. The other is within the veteran community itself of trying to keep down extremism.
All right, well, I think we are out of time, but I want to thank this wonderful, wonderful panel for these great insights. I want to thank all of you, and please proceed with engagement and love. Thank you.